A pleasant day to everyone. First, I would like to thank all of you for giving me an opportunity to share with you some insights with regards to choosing the methods and procedures in conducting your research. Let us start by answering this question. What is the difference between research design and research method? Research design is a plan to answer your research question, while a research method is a strategy used to implement that plan. Research design and methods are different but closely related because good research design ensures that the data you obtain will help you answer your research questions more effectively. So, why or which research method should you choose? Well, it depends on your research goal. It depends on what subjects and who you want to study. Let's say you are interested in studying what makes people happy or why some students are more conscious about recycling on campus. To answer these questions, you need to make a decision about how to collect your data. Most frequently used methods include number one, observation or participation observation, then surveys, interviews, focus groups, experiments, secondary data analysis, or and mixed methods, the combination of some of the methods that I stated earlier. One particular method could be better suited to your research goal than others because the data you collect from different methods will be different in quality and quantity. For instance, surveys are usually designed to produce relatively short answers rather than the extensive responses expected in qualitative interviews. How about the question, what other factors should you consider when choosing one method over another? Time for data collection and analysis is something you want to consider. An observation or interview method, so-called qualitative approach, helps you collect richer information, but it takes time. Using a survey helps you collect more data quickly, yet it may lack details. So you will need to consider the time you have for research and the balance between strengths and weaknesses associated with each other. Example, the qualitative versus quantitative. Decide how you plan to design the study. So these are the things that you have to consider from Sacred Heart University by Bem Daryl J. Writing the Empirical Analytical Group. Before beginning your paper, you need to decide how you plan to design the study. The research design refers to the overall strategy that you choose to integrate the different components of the study in a coherent and logical way, thereby ensuring you will effectively address the research problem. It constitutes the blueprint for collection, measurement, and analysis of data. Note that your research problem determines the type of design you can use, not the other way around. The function of a research design is to ensure that the evidence obtained enables you to effectively address the research problem as unambiguously as possible. In social research, obtaining evidence relevant to the research problem generally entails specifying the type of evidence needed to test a theory, to evaluate a program, or to accurately describe a phenomenon. However, researchers can often begin their investigations far too early before they have thought critically about what information is required to answer the study's research questions. Without attending to these design issues beforehand, the conclusions drawn risk being weak and unconvincing and consequently will fail to adequately address the overall research problem. Given this, the length and complexity of research designs can vary considerably, but any sound design will do the following things. Number one, identify the research problem clearly and justify its selection. Of course, in choosing or deciding how to design your study, you have to really identify your research problem. It should be clear in your mind that these questions must be answered by your research study. Review previously published literature associated with the problem area, then clearly and explicitly specify hypotheses. Effectively describe the data which will be necessary for an adequate test of the hypothesis and explain how such data will be obtained, and describe the methods of analysis which will be applied to the data in determining whether or not the hypotheses are true or false. So these are the following methods that you can choose from. The first one is the action research. The essentials of action research method follow a characteristic cycle whereby initially an exploratory stance is adopted, where an understanding of a problem is developed and plans are made for some form of interventionary strategy. Then the intervention is carried out. The action in action research, during which time pertinent observations are collected in various forms. The new interventional strategies are carried out and the cyclic process repeats, continuing until a sufficient understanding of the problem is achieved. The protocol is iterative or cyclical in nature and is intended to foster deeper understanding of a given situation, starting with conceptualizing and particularizing the problem and moving through several interventions and evaluations. What do these studies tell you? This action research. A collaborative and adaptive research design that lends itself to use in work or community situations. Design focuses on pragmatic and solution-driven research rather than testing theories. Kaya tayo nag-action research para ma-solve na agad-agad yung problema. Kung meron tayong problema na nakita, like for example in business, pwede tayong mag-conduct ng action research para magbigay solusyon sa mga problemang iyon. Then, when practitioners use action research, it has the potential to increase the amount they learn consciously from their experience. The action research cycle can also be regarded as a learning cycle. Totoo naman yun. Kung na-solve mo na yung problema at may nag-arise na panibagong problema, then you do action research again, and then paikot-ikot lang. Action search studies often have direct and obvious relevance to practice. There are no hidden controls or preemption of direction by the researcher. But take note that action research is harder to do than conducting conventional studies because the researcher takes on responsibilities for encouraging change as well as for research. Of course, mahirap yan. Kasi kung, like for example, nakita mong problema yon, pero parte na pala ng kanilang kultura yon, then bibigyan mo ng solusyon, magbibigay ka na sa kanila ng dapat nilang gawin para ma-improve, for example, yung sales nila sa kanilang business, medyo mahirap mag-encourage ng mga tao, lalo na kung matanda na yun sa profession. So, as a researcher, kailangan magaling tayong mag-motivate kung gusto niya ng action research. Action research is much harder to write up because you probably can't use a standard format to report your findings effectively. Personal over-involvement of the researcher may bias research results. Baka kasi mamaya ikaw mismo yung may problema at ikaw yung nag-i-implement ng panibagong solusyon para ma-solve yung problema, medyo magkakaroon ng konting bias in terms of reporting the results. The cyclic nature of action research is to achieve its twin outcomes of action. Kaya siya tinawag na action research kasi meron kang action na ibibigay to solve a certain problem. The second one is case study. The second method that you may use in conducting your research is case study. A case study is an in-depth study of a particular research problem rather than a sweeping statistical survey. It is often used to narrow down a very broad field of research into one or a few easily researchable examples. The case study research design is also useful for testing whether a specific theory and model actually applies to phenomena in the real world. It is a useful design when not much is known about a phenomenon. So pwede niyong gamitin ito kung wala pang masyadong alam ang lahat tungkol sa isang phenomena, pwede tayong mag-case study. Saka mas madali dito sa case study, meron ka lang specific na, for example, may specific business ka lang na pag-aaralan. Hindi katulad sa mga survey na kailangan mas marami ang iyong participants, marami ang iyong respondents. Dito sa case study, pwedeng isa lang. So what do these studies tell you? Approach excels at bringing us to an understanding of a complex issue through detailed contextual analysis of a limited number of events or conditions and their relationships. A researcher using a case study design can apply a variety of methodologies and rely on a variety of sources to investigate a research problem. Design can extend experience or add strength to what is already known through previous research. Social scientists in particular make wide use of this research design to examine contemporary real-life situations and provide the basis for the application of concepts and theories and extension of methods. The design can provide detailed descriptions of specific rare cases. So pwede kapag mga rare yung cases natin, then we can do case study. But we have to take note that case study, a single or small number of cases offers little basis for establishing reliability or to generalize the findings to a wider population of people, places, or things. Hindi pwede actually na i-generalize mo yung magiging resulta mo dahil case study nga ito. Hindi mo pwedeng sabihin na true ito sa lahat or false ito sa lahat kung ano man ang maging resulta ng iyong study. The intense exposure to study of the case may bias a researcher's interpretation of the findings. So sometimes dahil nga tutok ka dito, dahil you are studying a phenomena, you are looking into the case, involved ka masyado, because of that involvement, sometimes nagkakaroon na ng biases. Maybe yung researcher na palapit na doon sa kanyang participant, kaya nagkakaroon na ng biases in terms of the interpretation of the findings. Kaya dapat walang emotional attachment kapag nagre-research ka para ma-report mo talaga kung ano ang totoo at kung ano ang karapat-dapat. Masagot mo kung ano yung mga tanong mo doon sa Chapter 1. Design does not facilitate assessment of cause and effect relationships. Vital information may be missing, making the case hard to interpret. The case may not be representative or typical of the larger problem being investigated. If the criteria for selecting a case is because it represents a very unusual or unique phenomenon or problem for study, then your interpretation of the findings can only apply to the particular case. So that's case study. So we already have two. The first one is the action research and the second one is case study. We move on to the third one, your third option in designing your method, causal design. Causality studies may be thought of as understanding a phenomenon in terms of conditional statement in the form, if X, then Y. This type of research is used to measure what impact a specific change will have on existing norms and assumptions. So dito, alamin natin ano yung dahilan bakit siya ganun. Ano yung dahilan bakit sila successful? Ano yung dahilan bakit sila nalulugi? Ano yung dahilan bakit sila dinarayo ng mga turista, ng mga customers, yung mga businesses na yan. Causal effect occurs when variation in one phenomenon, an independent variable leads to or results on average in variation in another phenomenon, the dependent variable. Conditions necessary for determining causality. So the first one is the empirical association. A valid conclusion is based on finding an association between the independent variable and the dependent variable. Appropriate time order. To conclude that causation was involved, one must see that cases were exposed to variation in the independent variable before variation in the dependent variable. And then the last one is non-spuriousness. Non-spuriousness, a relationship between two variables that is not due to variation in a third variable. Bakit kailangan natin gamitin itong causal? Causality research designs helps researchers understand why the world works the way it does through the process of proving a causal link between variables and eliminating other possibilities. So, noon pa lang talagang may ginagamit na natin ang causal research method. Sa pagdiscovery pa lang, saan nagsimula ang mundo, saan nagsimula ang tao. So kung makikita natin, di ba, there are lots of causal researches. Bakit nalulusaw ang bato sa sobrang init? Yung laging mayroong dahilan, laging mayroong cause yung mga bagay-bagay. And we still have to take note that causal research method, not all relationships are causal. Hindi naman talaga lahat, ano? The possibility always exists that by sheer coincidence, two unrelated events appear to be related. Then conclusions about causal relationships are difficult to determine due to a variety of extraneous and confounding variables that exist in a social environment. This means causality can only be inferred, never proven. So, ni-inferred lang natin, ano? If two variables are correlated, the cause must come before the effect. However, even though two variables might be causally related, it can sometimes be difficult to determine which variable comes first and therefore to establish which variable is the actual cause and which is the actual effect. So that is causal method. And then the next one is the cohort. Often used in the medical sciences, ayan, ginagamit ito kadalasan sa medical sciences but also found in the applied social sciences, pwede rin naman sa applied social sciences, and maybe in business research. A cohort study generally refers to a study conducted over a period of time involving members of a population which the subject or representative member comes from and who are united by some commonality or similarity. Using a quantitative framework, a cohort study makes note of statistical occurrence within a specialized subgroup. Pwede naman talaga dito rin sa business research kasi meron naman din tayong pwedeng mga ma-group na mga businesses. Like for example, lahat sila nagtitinda ng pizza, nag-o-offer sila ng coffee. So pwede tayong makabuo ng isang cohort. And then open cohort studies involve a population that is defined just by the state of being a part of the study in question. Date of entry and exit from study is individually defined. Therefore, the size of the study population is not constant. In open cohort studies, researchers can only calculate rate-based data, such as incidence rates and variance thereof. Closed cohort studies involve participants who enter into the study at one defining point in time and where it is presumed that no new participants can enter the cohort. Given this, the number of study participants remains constant. But we still have to know, why do these studies tell you? The use of cohort is often mandatory because a randomized control study may be unethical. For example, you cannot deliberately expose people to asbestos. You can only study its effects on those who have already been exposed. Tulad ngayon, di ba sa pandemic na nararanasan natin ngayon, hindi mo pwedeng i-expose yung mga tao sa virus para lang malaman mo kung ano yung tamang bakuna para sa virus na ito. Kundi, ang pag-aaralan mo dito ay yung mga tinamaan na. Because cohort studies measure potential causes before the outcomes has occurred. They can demonstrate that these causes preceded the outcome, thereby avoiding the debate as to which is the cause and which is the effect. Cohort analysis is highly flexible and can provide insight into effects over time and related to a variety of different types of changes. Examples are social, cultural, political, economic, and many, many more. Either original data or secondary data can be used in this design. We move on to the next one, which is the cross-sectional method. Cross-sectional research method have three distinctive features: no time dimension, a reliance on existing differences rather than change following intervention, and groups are selected based on existing differences rather than random allocation. The cross-sectional design can only measure differences between or from among a variety of people, subjects, or phenomena rather than change. As such, researchers using this design can only employ a relative passive approach to making causal inferences based on findings. And take note that cross-sectional studies provide a snapshot of the outcome and the characteristics associated with it at a specific point in time. Unlike the experimental design, where there is an active intervention by the researcher to produce and measure change or to create differences, cross-sectional designs focus on studying and drawing inferences from existing differences between people, subjects, or phenomena. And it also entails collecting data at and concerning one point in time, while longitudinal studies involve taking multiple measures over an extended period of time. Cross-sectional research is focused on finding relationships between variables at one moment in time. But in cross-sectional studies, finding people, subjects, or phenomena to study that are very similar except in one specific variable can be difficult. Medyo mahirap talaga, no? Nahahanap ka ng mga tao na magkakagrupo, igugrupo mo sila, or subject na magkakagrupo, o phenomena na magkakagrupo, medyo mahirap yon. Because most especially in business, mas gusto nila yung mas kakaiba sila, kaya ayaw nila yung gumagaya lang. Pero meron pa rin naman, pwede pa rin naman ninyong magamit ito, no? Itong cross-sectional. And then results are static and time-bound and therefore give no indication of a sequence of events or reveal historical context. Studies cannot be utilized to establish cause and effect relationships, then provide only a snapshot of analysis. So there is always the possibility that a study could have differing results if another time frame had been chosen. So baka mamaya kapag good for 1 quarter yung kinandak mong study, iba naman din yung maging result kapag semi-annually. So, may mga pagkakataon na hindi mo talaga siya pwedeng i-generalize. Then, the next one is the descriptive method. Ito yung pinaka-ginagamit ngayon, most especially with your study, with your thesis in the undergrad. Descriptive research design help provide answers to the questions of who, what, when, where, and how. associated with a particular research problem. A descriptive study cannot conclusively ascertain answer to why. Descriptive research is used to obtain information concerning the current status of the phenomena and to describe what exists with respect to variables or conditions in a situation. So what do these studies tell you? Descriptive method. The subject is being observed in a completely natural and unchanged natural environment. Through experiments, will give analyzable data, often adversely influence the normal behavior of the subject. Descriptive research is often used as a precursor to move quantitatively research designs. The general overview giving some valuable pointers as to what variables are worth testing quantitatively. If the limitations are understood, they can be a useful tool in developing a more focused study. And descriptive studies can yield rich data that lead to important recommendations. Kaya nga ito yung kadalasan pinagagamit o ginagamit ninyo. Kasi when you use this method, pwede kayong makakuha ng mga rich data na pwede nating magamit o pwedeng magamit ng future para sa mga recommendations. Then approach collects a large amount of data for detailed analysis. But of course, ang descriptive method, meron din naman siyang disadvantage. So what are those? The results from a descriptive research cannot be used to discover a definitive answer or to disprove a hypothesis, because descriptive designs often utilize observational methods. The results cannot be replicated. The descriptive function of research is heavily dependent on instrumentation for measurement and observation. Next is the experimental design. A blueprint of the procedure that enables the researcher to maintain control over all factors that may affect the result of an experiment. In doing this, the researcher attempts to determine or predict what may occur. Experimental is often used where there is time priority in a causal relationship. The cause precedes effect. There is consistency in a causal relationship and the magnitude of the correlation is great. Experimental research allows the researcher to control the situation. In so doing, it allows researchers to answer the question, what causes something to occur? Permits the researcher to identify cause and effect relationships between variables and to distinguish placebo effects from treatment effects. Experimental research designs support the ability to limit alternative explanations and to infer direct causal relationships in the study. Of course, if it is experimental, syempre kung ano yung naging resulta, yun lang yung i-report mo. Wala ka nang iibahin doon, hindi ka pwedeng magdagdag. So kung like for example, meron kayong gustong i-implement na isang marketing strategy, nagkaroon kayo ng isang experiment sa isang bayan, halimbawa, kung ano yung naging result ng inyong experiment, yun lang. Hindi po pwede na magdagdag pa o magbawas pa para pagandahin lang yung resulta. Para masabi lang na ang inyong experiment ay successful. Hindi ganon ang nagre-research. Then, the next one is the exploratory. Exploratory design is conducted about a research problem when there are few or no earlier studies to refer to. The focus is on gaining insights and familiarity for later investigation or undertaken when problems are in a preliminary stage of investigation. So basically, kung exploratory, mag-explore ka lang, para kang si Dora the Explorer, no? Tinitignan mo ang mga bagay-bagay, yun yung tinitignan mo, ano? So direction for future research and techniques get developed. Kung exploratory, sometimes kasi kung wala pang masyadong existing researches with regards to your present study, pwedeng exploratory ang gamitin mo. No? Tignan mo muna kasi yun yung pwedeng gamitin nila as basis in the future in conducting research related to your present study. And then the next one is historical. Pwede rin naman ito sa business, ano? Kasi ang history sa business mahalaga din. The purpose of historical research design is to collect, verify, and synthesize evidence from the past to establish facts that defend or refute your hypothesis. It uses secondary sources and a variety of primary documentary evidence. Siyempre, dahil ang inaaral mo, history na, pwede ka nang gumamit dito ng mga secondary sources. Ano yung secondary sources? Ito, example ng secondary sources are the logs, diaries, official records, reports, and many, many more. Pwede ring maps, pictures, audio, and visual recordings. Pwede lahat yon. The limitation is that the sources must be both authentic and valid. Baka mamaya, hindi naman authentic, hindi naman pala talaga yon, ginamit mo. Medyo maliligaw ka. So, ganun kapag historical. Then, the next one is longitudinal. A longitudinal study follows the same sample over time and makes repeated observations with longitudinal surveys. For example, the same group of people is interviewed at regular intervals, enabling researchers to track changes over time and to relate them to variables that might explain why the changes occur. Longitudinal research design describe patterns of change and help establish the direction and magnitude of causal relationships. Measurements are taken on each variable over two or more distinct time periods. This allows the researcher to measure change in variables over time. It is a type of observational studies and is sometimes referred to as a panel study. Then, we also have observational. Actually, you have lots of choices. In terms of the methods, research method na pwede ninyong gamitin in conducting your research. But make sure that the method that you are going to use is suitable in achieving your research objective. Masasagot ba ng inyong method ang mga research questions ninyo? Ganun yun, ano? So, bali dapat connected sila. Hindi po pwede na, ay, parang gusto ko yung action research, pero hindi naman pala yun ang sasagot doon sa research questions mo. Hindi naman pala yun ang makaka-attain ng research objective mo. Dapat jive sila. Observational. This type of research design draws a conclusion by comparing subjects against a control group in cases where the researcher has no control over the experiment. So parang may experiment, kung kang nasa experimental, ikaw mismo yung nag-experiment. Dito sa observational, merong nag-experiment pero ikaw, observer ka lang. Wala kang control doon sa experiment. Observational studies are usually flexible and do not necessarily need to be structured around a hypothesis about what you expect to observe. The researcher is able to collect a depth of information about a particular behavior. Kasi nga, nakatingin ka. Kaya, nakikita mo talaga kung ano yung ikinikilos ng manager. For example, gusto mong maobserbahan, paano ba ang buhay ng isang manager sa isang fast food chain? Pwedeng observational ang gamitin mo doon. Ano? So, tignan mo, maaga ba siyang pumapasok, paano siya nakikipag-usap sa mga staff niya, paano niya na ma-manage yung buong store, mga ganun ba, no? Observational, nakatingin ka lang. And then the next one is philosophical design. Understood more as a broad approach to examining a research problem than a methodological design, philosophical analysis and argumentation is intended to challenge deeply embedded, often intractable assumptions underpinning an area of study. This approach uses the tools of argumentation derived from philosophical traditions, concepts, models, and theories to critically explore and challenge, for example, the relevance of logic and evidence in academic debates, to analyze arguments about fundamental issues, or to discuss the root of existing discourse about a research problem. So ang mga philosophical method can provide a basis for applying ethical decision making to practice. So pwede talaga to, ano ang ugali ng mga crew ng isang fast food chain, ng isang fine dining restaurant, ano ang ugali ng mga contractual individuals, contractual employees. And then the next one is the sequential method. Sequential research is that which is carried out in a deliberate stage approach, where one stage will be completed, followed by another, then another, and so on. Kaya siya sequential, with the aim that each stage will build upon the previous one until enough data is gathered over an interval of time to test your hypothesis. But of course, the sequence must be related to one another. Walang tinatalunan. Dapat, bago ka makapunta sa isa, sa isang step, dinaanan mo yung mga tamang steps. The researcher has a limitless option when it comes to sample size and the sampling schedule due to the repetitive nature of this research design. Minor changes and adjustments can be done during the initial parts of the study to correct and hone the research method. Useful design for exploratory studies. So pwede ito, yung sequential kung exploratory yung study mo, pwede siya. So those are some of the methods that you can choose from in designing your research. Pero marami pang iba, marami pa. Meron pa tayong iba't ibang mga methods na pwede ninyong gamitin. Pero ito yung some of them. The next question that we have to answer in designing your research is that how important it is to have a good methodology section. Gaano nga ba kahalaga na ang methodology section natin sa ating mga thesis ay maayos? The method section of a research paper provides the information by which a study's validity is judged. The method section answers two main questions. Number one, how was the data collected or generated? So dito kasi sa method section, in this unit or in this chapter of your thesis, dapat alam natin papaano ninyo kukolektahin ang mga data at yung mga data ito ang gagamitin ninyo para masagot yung mga research questions ninyo. Kasi hindi po pwede na mali yung data na makukuha ninyo. Baka mamaya yung data pala na makukuha ninyo hindi naman yun yung sasagot doon sa inyong mga tanong. Halimbawa, kung meron kang nililigawan, hindi po pwedeng dun mo sa kaibigan itatanong kung sasagutin ka ba niya. Kailangan itanong mo yon doon sa nililigawan mo para makakuha ka ng tamang sagot, para makapag-move on ka agad kung hindi ka naman talaga niya sasagutin, no? Kung busted, edi busted. Ganun sa research, di ba? Kung may chance, edi may chance. And then the next question is, how was it analyzed? The writing should be direct and precise and written in the past tense. Dahil nga na i-conduct mo na yan, nakuha mo na yung data, nakuha mo na yung sagot, past tense mo nang isusulat yan. At dapat precise. Anong ibig sabihin ng precise? Wala kang idinagdag, wala kang ibinawas. Hindi po pwede na mag-invento ka dyan. Okay? An effective, by the way, ito pa yung mga dapat nating tandaan, yung importansya ng good methodology section. You must explain how you obtain and analyze your results for the following reasons. Readers need to know how the data was obtained because the method you choose affects the results and by extension, how you likely interpreted those results. And then, methodology is crucial for any branch of scholarship because an unreliable method produces an unreliable results and it misappropriates interpretations of findings. Kaya dapat talaga na good ang ating methodology section. Actually, I encourage you to make research phases. Para meron kayong phase 1. Ano yung gagawin nyo sa phase 1? Mamimili kayo ng mga Mga respondents, ano sa phase 2, pag napili nyo na yung respondents, gagawa ka, ay, una muna pala, phase 1, design your tool. Okay, phase 2, validate and test the tool para nakikita nyo meron kayong roadmap. Ano ba ang mangyayari sa pagko-conduct ninyo ng research? An effectively methodology section should, number 1, introduce the overall methodological approach for investigating your research problem. Is your study qualitative or quantitative? Or a combination of both? So dapat alam niyo yun, qualitative ba siya or quantitative? Dalawa lang naman ang design na meron tayo. Isang qualitative at isang quantitative. Pero may iba't ibang mga methods under qualitative and quantitative, or a combination of the two, which is the what we call mixed method. Are you going to take a special approach such as action research or a more neutral instance? So dapat mahalaga 'yon. Ano, alam niyo na ba? Alam niyo na agad ano ba yung design? Qualitative ka ba or quantitative? Pag naalaman mo na kung quali ka o quanti, ano naman yung method na gagamitin mo para makakuha ka ng qualitative data or makakuha ka ng quantitative data? Then the next one is indicate how the approach fits the overall research design. Your method should have a clear connection with your research problem. Siyempre naman, hindi po pwede na wala silang malinaw na relasyon. Bakit? Kasi kung bakit tayo nag-iisip ng method o ng research design ay dahil yon doon sa ating research problem. Doon nakabase yung magiging design natin. In other words, make sure that your methods will actually address the problem. One of the most common deficiencies found in research papers is that the proposed methodology is unsuited to achieving the stated objective of your paper. Hindi po pwedeng nagandahan ka sa action research, action research na gagamitin mo. Kung hindi naman yun makakasagot doon sa iyong mga research questions, then do not use it. Humanap ka ng isang method na talagang makakasagot o makakatulong sa iyo para ma-reach mo yung iyong objective, ma-attain mo yung iyong objective. The next one is, describe the specific methods of data collection you are going to use, such as surveys, interviews, questionnaires, observations. If you are analyzing existing data such as a data set or previous documents, describe how it was originally created or gathered and by whom. Yan. So mahalaga din yan, yung paggawa ninyo ng inyong data collection tool. Hindi po pwedeng basta-basta na lang. Kailangan yung inyong tool sasagot din o makakakuha ng data na sasagot doon sa inyong research question. So sometimes hindi lang iisang tool ang ginagamit natin. Hindi po pwedeng puro research ay survey lang. Hindi po pwedeng puro survey. Sometimes we have to validate the answers of our respondents through observation, through interviews. So hindi po pwede na iisang tool lang. Talagang gagamit tayo ng more than one tools para makakuha talaga tayo ng rich data na makakatulong sa atin to answer the questions. Next one is explain how you intend to analyze your results. Will you use statistical analysis? Will you use specific theoretical perspectives to help you analyze a text or explain observed behaviors? Kasi kung quantitative yan, you are looking into quantity, talagang meron kang gagamitin na statistical tool. Pero kung qualitative naman yan, wala ka ng statistical tool na gagamitin dyan dahil wala kang i-stat dyan. So dapat mahalaga yon. Mahalagang alam natin yon. The next one is provide background and rationale for methodologies that are unfamiliar for your readers. Paliwanag mo naman, mabuti, no? Hindi po pwede na ikaw lang nakakaintindi ng method mo. Ikaw lang nakakaintindi ng kung ano ang mangyayari doon sa research mo. Kaya mo ginawa yung research mo ay para makatulong, para makapag-generate ng panibagong information na pwedeng gamitin in the future and also at present. So paliwanag nating mabuti. Address potential, and then next one is provide a rational for subject selection and sampling procedure. For instance, if you propose to conduct interviews, how do you intend to select the sample population? If you are analyzing text, which texts have you chosen and why? Then if you are using statistics, why is this set of statistics being used? If other data sources exist, explain why the data you chose is most appropriate. Ipaliwanag nyo. And then address potential limitations. Talaga naman, para sa chapter 1 pa lang, ina-address na natin ano yung potential limitations. And most especially, we are also required to put in our thesis some potential ethical issues. Kasi meron yan, merong mga ethical issues talaga na dapat nating i-consider in conducting the research. Unang-una na, yung identity ng mga businesses, yung identity ng mga participants. Dapat yan ay nakatago sa inyo lang dalawa, with full confidentiality na for research purposes only. Okay? And take note that once you have written all of the elements of the method section, subsequent revision should focus on how to present those elements as clearly and as logically as possibly. The description of how you prepare to study the research problem, how you gather the data, and the protocol for analyzing the data should be organized chronologically. For clarity, when a large amount of detail must be presented, information should be presented in subsections according to topic. These are the problems to avoid. Siyempre, meron kayong mga problema na may encounter in conducting your research, in designing your research, mag-ready na kayo, Kasi these are constant. Problems are constant. Sa buhay ng tao, talagang laging may problema. Kung wala ka ng problema, di ka na humihinga nun. Kaya magpasalamat tayo dahil tayo ay may problema, ibig sabihin, tayo ay humihinga pa. Because that's constant. And take note that problems are made to be solved. Gagawa ka ng paraan para masolusyonan yung problema. Hindi yung gagawa ka pa ng another problem, may problema ka na nga, magkakabuhol-buhol na yan. Okay? The first one is irrelevant detail. Anong ibig sabihin yan? The methodology section of your paper should be thorough but to the point. Hindi pwedeng kung ano-ano pa. Hindi pwedeng para ka nagsusulat ng essay na napakarami mong sinasabing mga mabubulaklak na salita. It's not the way how research papers are being written. Don't provide any background information that doesn't directly help the reader to understand why a particular method was chosen, how the data was gathered or obtained, and how it was analyzed. Huwag nyo nang isulat pa yun, And then the next one is unnecessary explanation of basic procedures. Ipagpalagay nyo naman, ang babasa naman itong mga research outputs nyo na ito ay mga pwedeng kapwa nyo estudyante, yung mga sumusunod sa inyo, na may alam naman na. Kapag ka mga basic na, huwag nyo nang masyadong i-elaborate pa. Huwag nyo nang i-explain masyado because there are things na understood na nila agad yon. Naiintindihan na nila agad yun. Isang kindat nyo lang sa kanila, naiintindihan na nila yun. Then the next one is problem blindedness. It is almost a given that you will encounter problems when collecting or generating your data. Do not ignore these problems or pretend they did not occur. Hindi pwedeng magbulag-bulagan kayo. May problema na nga, Hindi po pwede na hindi nyo siya pansinin. Kailangan pagtuunan nyo yung problema na yon. Often, documenting how you overcame obstacles can form an interesting part of the methodology. It demonstrates to the reader that you can provide true rationale for the decisions you made to minimize the impact of any problems that arose. Then the literature review. Chapter 1 pa lang, nagli-lit review na kayo, Just as the literature review section of your paper provides an overview of sources you have examined while researching a particular topic, The methodology section should cite any sources that informed your choice and application of a particular method. Siyempre, pag naglagay din kayo ng particular method, meron ding literature review yon. Bakit yon? Saan ba siya ginamit? Bakit ito ang napili mo? Bakit ito sa palagay mo ang suitable for your study? Meron ding literature review. Meron ding sinasabi yung literature natin dyan. Kaya, i-provide nyo yun sa mga readers para alam nila. Okay? And then the last one is it's more than sources of information. A description of a research studies method should not be confused with the description of the sources of information. Such a list of sources is useful in itself, especially if it is accompanied by an explanation about the selection and use of the sources. The description of the project's methodology complements a list of sources in that it sets forth the organization and interpretation of information emanating from those sources. Yan, yung mga problema na pwede ninyong ma-encounter na kailangan nyong solusyonan at i-avoid. Statistical designs and tests. Ito na yung mga kinatatakutan ng karamihan sa inyo. Pag narinig na yung salitang statistics, akala nila ito torture na sila. Well, in fact, hindi naman. Ang statistics talaga, yan ang tumutulong sa atin para mapadali ang mga buhay-buhay natin. Ano? Napakahirap i-explain yan ng research mo kung walang statistics. Kaya mahalaga ang statistics in conducting your research. Ito lang masasabi ko sa inyo. Don't fear them. Don't avoid using a quantitative approach to analyzing your research problem just because you fear the idea of applying statistical designs and tests. Meron naman technology ngayon. We have lots of resources. We already have some ways paano makapag-solve, paano makapag-gather, makapag-compute ng mga statistics. A qualitative approach such as conducting interviews or content analysis of text can yield exciting new insights about a research problem. But it should not be undertaken simply because you have a disdain for running a simple regression. A well-designed quantitative research study can often be accomplished in very clear and direct ways, whereas a similar study of a qualitative nature usually requires considerable time to analyze large volumes of data and a tremendous burden to create new paths for analysis where previously no path associated with your research problem had existed. Okay. So, yung statistics naman, madali lang yan. Huwag niyong kinatatakutan. Dahil pag natakot kayo dyan, walang mangyayari sa research ninyo. Hindi nyo yan mai-interpret. Kaya, ang statistics dapat minamahal, hindi tinatanggihan. So, that's all I guess. The methods and procedures in conducting your thesis in your business research, to be specific. I wish you all the best of luck. I wish you all to have a quality research and sana ay maging useful yung inyong webinar for today. Once again, thank you very much for listening and attending. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.